They thought she was just another black woman they could intimidate, until one phone call changed everything. Charlotte Langford was a picture of grace and composure, her posture straight, her eyes calm, her every movement deliberate. She had nothing to hide, no reason to fear. Yet here she was, being treated like a criminal. Earlier that evening, Charlotte had left a high-profile charity fundraiser, the kind of event where the city's most influential figures gathered to raise money for causes that truly mattered. She had spent hours in polite conversations, smiling for photographs, and making sure every handshake was genuine. Now, as she drove home through the quiet, tree-lined streets of Crest Haven, the weight of the evening was starting to melt away. Dressed in a stunning deep sapphire gown that shimmered under the occasional street lamp, she looked every bit the elegant, confident woman she was. The air outside was still, the kind of peaceful suburban night that made you feel safe. The glow of the city lights was fading in her rear-view mirror, replaced by stretches of dimly lit road. Her mind drifted to thoughts of her children, probably already in bed, and of her husband Daniel Langford, the newly appointed chief of police for Crest Haven County. She knew he was proud of her work and how much she gave back to the community. Her phone buzzed softly on the passenger seat. Glancing at it, she saw Daniel's name on the screen. She smiled to herself, thinking she would answer at the next stoplight and tell him she'd be home soon. But just as she reached for it, the calm night shattered. A sudden flash of red and blue lights lit up her rear-view mirror, cutting through the darkness like a warning. Her heart skipped. Frowning in confusion, Charlotte eased her foot off the gas and steered her car to the side of the road. She ran through the possibilities in her mind. She hadn't been speeding, hadn't run a red light, and her phone was untouched until that moment. Nothing made sense. She rolled down her window as a tall police officer approached. His face was hard, expressionless, and his tone carried no hint of politeness. "License and registration," he said flatly. Charlotte kept her voice calm as she handed over her documents, though her pulse had quickened. "Officer, may I ask why I'm being stopped?" The officer's eyes didn't soften. "Your vehicle matches the description of one involved in suspicious activity in this area." A cold shiver ran down her spine. The accusation was vague, almost deliberately unsettling. "That must be a mistake," she said carefully. "I just left a charity event." "Step out of the car, ma'am." Her grip on the steering wheel tightened. She hesitated, the tension between them thick in the cool night air. Before she could respond, another police cruiser pulled up behind the first. Two more officers stepped out, their flashlights slicing through the darkness and flooding her car's interior with harsh white beams. Charlotte swallowed, unbuckled her seatbelt, and moved exactly as Daniel had taught her. Slowly, deliberately, giving no excuse for sudden accusations. She opened the door and stepped out, her gown glinting under the flashing lights, her breath steady even as unease gnawed at her. Without asking permission, the officers began to search her vehicle. One opened the trunk, tossing aside neatly stacked brochures from the fundraiser, as if expecting to uncover something illegal. Humiliation burned in her chest, but she kept her chin high. "I'd like to call my husband," she said firmly. One of the officers scoffed. "That won't be necessary." Charlotte's patience thinned. She reached for her phone with steady fingers and dialed Daniel. Across town, he had been trying to reach her ever since she left the fundraiser. When her call finally came through, relief crossed his face until he heard her tone. "Daniel," she began, her voice controlled but tight. "I've been pulled over. They're searching my car without cause. I need you here now." A cold fury gripped Daniel. Years in public service had taught him to stay calm under pressure, but this was different. This was his wife. "Where are you?" he asked, already grabbing his keys. Charlotte gave him her location, her voice faltering just slightly. "Please hurry." Phones were raised in every direction, recording the entire scene. The flashing red and blue lights washed over the street, casting sharp shadows and reflecting in the uneasy faces of the officers. Something had shifted. The power was no longer theirs, and they could feel it. Daniel faced them, his voice colder and sharper than before. "Do you have any idea the kind of legal trouble you've created for this department? You harass an innocent citizen, my wife, without a single valid reason. This isn't just bad judgment. It's unacceptable." One of the younger officers stuttered, "Yes, sir, We were just doing our job. Your actions say otherwise. Daniel cut in, crossing his arms. He gave them one last command, each word clipped and firm. Call your supervisor. Now. The lead officer hesitated, his fingers twitching near his radio. But he didn't have much choice. Slowly, and with obvious reluctance, he called it in. None of them realized that the real storm was only beginning. By the next morning, videos of the incident had exploded across social media. Under hashtags like hashtag Justice for Charlotte and hashtag Accountability Matters, the confrontation spread far and wide. News outlets ran headlines questioning the integrity of the Crest Haven County Police Department. The backlash was instant. The officers involved were at the center of a firestorm. At home, Daniel and Charlotte sat at their dining table, the weight of the night still heavy in the air. Sunlight poured through the windows, but the tension was unshaken. Charlotte, exhausted yet unbroken, sipped her coffee while Daniel scrolled through his phone, reading the flood of articles and public reactions. They're calling it the Langford incident, Daniel muttered, shaking his head. I knew this would draw attention, but this is bigger than I imagined. Charlotte set her cup down and met his eyes. This isn't about us, Daniel. It's about what it means. How many people go through this every single day and don't have the voice we do? They deserve justice too. Daniel nodded, his jaw set. I've spent my entire career trying to root out this behavior. Last night made it painfully clear we still have so far to go. That afternoon, an emergency press conference was called. Daniel stood before a room packed with reporters and concerned residents, his expression determined. The atmosphere was electric. Everyone wanted answers. What happened last night was unacceptable, he began, his voice carrying through the hall. The actions of those officers were not just against protocol. They were a betrayal of public trust. There will be accountability. The room erupted in applause, but Daniel knew speeches weren't enough. Real change had to follow. The incident had placed the Crest Haven Police Department under a national microscope. Activists, media, and community leaders were demanding justice. As the newly appointed commissioner, Daniel was in the middle of it all, but he refused to let the moment pass without real reform. Charlotte stood beside him on the stage, silent but powerful. Cameras flashed, capturing the woman whose rights had been violated, yet who now stood strong. I want to be clear, Daniel continued. This is not who we are, and it's not who we will be. Effective immediately, there will be a full and transparent investigation. The officers involved are on administrative leave, and this case will not be swept under the rug. But this is about more than one incident. This is about change. He let the words hang in the air before asking, why do situations like this keep happening? And what will we do to stop them? Charlotte then stepped forward, her voice calm but cutting through the room. When I was pulled over last night, I followed every instruction. I did everything right. Yet I was treated like a suspect, not a citizen. I wasn't seen as a person. I was seen as a problem to be dealt with. But I also know change is possible. It starts with accountability. It starts with people speaking up. And it starts with leaders willing to challenge the system from within. In the days that followed, action came quickly. New training programs on de-escalation and implicit bias were introduced. A citizens advisory board was formed to review complaints and guarantee transparency. Community leaders were invited to the table, and Daniel personally promised that reforms would be real, not just words. The officers from that night faced consequences. One resigned rather than face disciplinary hearings. The others were reassigned pending investigation. The incident had forced the department to confront uncomfortable truths about its own culture. Charlotte, meanwhile, embraced an unexpected role advocate. She began speaking out for others who had suffered similar mistreatment but had no platform to tell their story. This was no longer just about her. It was about the countless people who face this reality every day. This isn't just about me, she told a crowd at a local rally. It's about making sure no one else has to live through it. From that point on, Charlotte became a leading voice for reform, while Daniel worked to change the system from within. Together, they proved that change was possible when people refused to stay silent. The Langford story became more than just an incident. It was a movement. It carried 3 important lessons. First, dignity and respect are not negotiable. Charlotte had followed every rule, yet was still wronged. Second, real change requires action. Daniel could have stayed quiet, but he chose transparency and justice. And third, the power of a united community can force progress. Years later, Daniel's reforms became a model nationwide, and Charlotte continued her advocacy. The fight had been long, but they never backed down. Because of them, Cresthaven and far beyond was never the same again.